It was an ordinary evening when I first found the condom wrapper. I hadn't thought much of it at first, though the circumstances were strange. My wife, Emma, and I were trying to have a baby, so I didn't expect to find something like that in our bedroom. I assumed the condom wrapper belonged to our daughter, Grace, and her boyfriend, David. It was disturbing to think they might have been using our room, but I knew how close Grace had gotten with him, so I wanted to handle it delicately. Grace had always been an honest, straightforward kid. We had the kind of relationship where we could talk about most things. So, when I saw her that evening, I tried to address the situation gently. "Grace," I started, leaning on the kitchen counter as she sat sipping her coffee. "I don't care about your private life. It's your business, but please, if you're going to be intimate with David, don't do it in our room with your mom. It's uncomfortable." Grace looked at me, utterly bewildered. She frowned, setting her cup down. "Dad, what are you talking about?" she asked, her voice honest and full of confusion. I waved the small package in the air. "This," I said, my stomach twisting slightly. "I found this in our bedroom. Just don't do it in there, okay?" For a moment, Grace just stared at the wrapper in my hand. Then, to my surprise, her face twisted in disgust. "David and I have never been in your room. Never." "That's gross," she said firmly. Her conviction was clear. Grace had no reason to lie, and in all our years, she never had. I believed her. Suddenly, the uneasy feeling in my stomach deepened into a pit of dread. "Then, where did it come from?" I muttered to myself, suddenly not wanting to know the answer. I felt something shift inside me, a crack in the foundation of my trust. A small, nagging voice whispered the unthinkable. What if it wasn't Grace at all? What if... My wife, Emma, had been acting strange for a while now, but I had brushed it off. The subtle avoidance, the unexplained late-night walks, and the coldness between us that we both pretended not to notice. We'd been trying for months to have a baby, undergoing fertility treatments, doctor visits, and intimate conversations about how much we wanted this. But somewhere along the way, something had changed. A wave of nausea hit me as I connected the dots. Grace's boyfriend, David, had been spending more time around the house. He'd always been polite, respectful, even charming. But now, small moments flashed through my mind. The times when I'd find Emma laughing a little too easily at David's jokes, or when I'd catch the two of them standing just a bit too close together in the kitchen. At first, I had chalked it up to friendly banter, but now it felt off like something I had been too blind to see. Later that evening, I lay awake in bed next to Emma, my mind racing with suspicion. I didn't confront her then, still unsure of how to even begin processing the betrayal I suspected. But I knew I needed to find out for certain. Over the next few days, I watched her carefully. She was distracted, her eyes always flitting away when I asked about her day. She spent more time outside of the house, claiming she was going for walks to clear her head, and yet I noticed how often her phone buzzed when she thought I wasn't looking. My world had already begun to crumble, but I wasn't ready to let it crash down completely. Not yet. I needed proof. My suspicions grew like an unbearable weight on my chest, pressing harder each day. Emma's behavior had shifted in subtle, yet glaring ways, ones I couldn't ignore anymore. It wasn't just the distance between us. It was her new habit of taking her phone with her everywhere, even to the bathroom, and the sudden hush phone call she excused as work-related. But worst of all was the tension between her and David, our daughter's boyfriend. It was as if they were trying too hard to act normal around each other, which only made their interactions seem more strained. I felt like a fool, doubting the woman I'd loved for years, but something in my gut screamed that this was more than paranoia. That evening, I couldn't stand it any longer. Emma sat in the living room reading one of her novels, The Picture of Innocence. The scene might have calmed me if I wasn't already on edge. Instead, I excused myself quietly and went upstairs. Our bedroom had always been a place of comfort, but now, it felt tainted, like something sacred had been defiled. I couldn't shake the image of that condom wrapper from my mind. The nagging thought that Emma and David might have been in here together made my skin crawl. I needed proof. Something tangible to confirm or dismiss the growing suspicion that threatened to consume me. I began rifling through her things, opening drawers and closets, feeling ridiculous and violated all at once. But as I dug through her nightstand, my heart stopped. Buried under some old receipts and papers was a second phone. My breath caught in my throat. I picked it up slowly, the weight of it heavy in my hand, as though it was a confirmation of all my worst fears. Emma had never mentioned a second phone. There had never been a reason for her to have one, or at least none that I could think of. My hands shook as I turned it on, dread curling in my stomach like a living thing. When the lock screen flashed to life, the password prompt appeared, confirming my fears. It wasn't our usual passcode, and despite trying a few combinations I could think of, none worked. Frustrated, I tossed the phone back into the drawer, feeling sick. There had to be more. I searched further, now desperate for answers. After a few minutes, I found what I was looking for, or rather, I found what I didn't want to find. Tucked behind Emma's stack of shoes was a small box of condoms. The same brand as the wrapper I'd found in the room, and not the kind we'd ever used. My stomach lurched violently. It all made sense now, the late nights, the secrecy, the distance. I wanted to scream, but instead, I stood there in our bedroom, gripping the evidence of her betrayal, feeling my world collapse. For a long time, I just stood there, my mind racing between disbelief and fury. It was one thing to suspect, but finding proof like this turned everything cold inside me. This wasn't just infidelity. It was something deeper, darker, a betrayal that slashed through every layer of trust we had built over the years. I took a deep breath and tucked the box of condoms back where I found them. This wasn't the time to confront her. Not yet. I needed to be certain of everything before I made my move. Before I tore everything apart. The next few days were torture. I acted normal, going through the motions of work, meals, and even small talk with Emma, but inside, I was spiraling. My paranoia made me hyper-aware of everything. Her every word, every glance she exchanged with David when he came over. Even when Grace was around, I could feel the tension in the room, though she seemed oblivious to it. David still came by frequently to see Grace, but every time he walked into our home, I couldn't help but wonder if it was really her he was there to see. I watched him closely, too closely, searching for any sign of guilt or unease. But he acted like everything was normal, like nothing was happening. Then one afternoon, everything changed. Grace had gone out with friends, and I was home earlier than usual. I hadn't told Emma that I'd be coming back, wanting to surprise her, though part of me now wondered if I was hoping to catch something in the act. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed David's car parked out front. My heart dropped into my stomach. Grace wasn't home. So why was David here? I sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the house. The windows were shut, and everything looked perfectly normal. But inside, I knew something wasn't right. Slowly, I got out of the car and approached the front door, each step feeling heavier than the last. My mind raced with possibilities, my hands trembling as I reached for the doorknob. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. Too quiet. I moved through the rooms cautiously, my pulse racing as I headed toward the bedroom. That's when I heard it. Voices. Quiet, but unmistakable, coming from our room. Emma and David. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the slightly ajar door. The closer I got, the more I could make out the words. They were talking in hushed tones, voices too intimate for a casual conversation. Then, a soft laugh, the kind of laugh Emma used to reserve for me. I pushed the door open without a sound and saw them. Emma and David, sitting on the edge of the bed, their bodies too close, too comfortable. His hand rested lightly on her thigh, and she wasn't pulling away. It was enough to make my blood boil. They hadn't noticed me yet, too engrossed in whatever they were talking about. My vision blurred with rage, but I held myself back, bursting in there screaming, demanding answers. That would be too easy, too merciful. Instead, I quietly stepped back, closing the door behind me. I had seen enough. My hands were shaking as I closed the bedroom door. Rage and betrayal churned inside me, but I fought to stay calm. I had seen the two of them sitting there, my wife and my daughter's boyfriend, like nothing was wrong. My heart hammered in my chest as I stood in the hallway, staring at the floor, trying to process it all. It was real. There was no mistaking it now. Emma and David. What kind of person betrays their spouse with their own child's partner? I felt sick thinking about it. But I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of knowing they had broken me. Not yet. If Emma and David thought they could carry on like this, thinking I was too blind to see it, they had another thing coming. I left the house quietly, unnoticed. The drive away from home felt like an out-of-body experience, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The streets blurred past me as I sped away, but I wasn't driving aimlessly. I knew exactly where I was going. I needed space to think, clear my head, and that wasn't going to happen in that house. I parked near a small bar I used to visit when I wanted to escape. It was tucked away in a quiet part of town, a place where no one knew me, and I could just disappear for a while. Inside, the dim lights and low hum of voices helped dull the edges of my thoughts. I ordered a drink, though I wasn't sure I'd be able to get it down. I sat there for what felt like hours, playing the scenes over and over in my head. Every laugh they shared, every touch I'd seen between them. How had I missed it? How had I been so blind? But the answer came quickly. I hadn't missed it. I had just trusted Emma. I had given her the benefit of the doubt, believing she would never betray me like this. And David? I had trusted him around my daughter, never imagining that he could look me in the eye and then sneak behind my back to be with my wife. It was all so twisted. A plan began to form, slowly at first. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became. They deserved to suffer for what they had done, for the humiliation they had caused me, for betraying Grace. But I wasn't going to explode in anger, giving them the satisfaction of watching me break down. No, I would hurt them in a way they wouldn't see coming. We had been trying to have a child for years. Emma had been so desperate to get pregnant, and I had shared in that desperation. We had gone to doctors, endured endless treatments, and each failed attempt had chipped away at our marriage. But now, I wondered if Emma's desperation had come from somewhere else, from guilt. Perhaps having a baby was her way of trying to glue back together what she had broken without me knowing. But there was a cruel irony to all of this. We were still in the middle of fertility treatments, Just last month, Emma had insisted we visit a new specialist who had high success rates with in vitro fertilization. It was Emma's last hope, she said, to finally give us the child we both wanted so badly. She had begged me to do this, and out of love, I had agreed. Except now, the thought of her carrying my child made my skin crawl. I could no longer stomach the idea of raising a family with this woman, knowing what she had done. But a wicked thought entered my mind, a way to turn her betrayal into my weapon. The plan came together with terrifying clarity. At our last appointment, the fertility doctor had given us a schedule to follow, and tomorrow morning I was supposed to drop off a sperm sample for the procedure. Emma had been excited, practically glowing with anticipation. It was supposed to be the day that brought us one step closer to the family we dreamed of, or so she thought. But I had no intention of giving her my sperm. If she wanted a baby so badly, she would have one, but it wouldn't be mine. It would be from a random donor. She wouldn't know it until it was too late. The thought of her carrying someone else's child while believing it was mine brought a grim satisfaction that I couldn't shake. It was poetic justice. If she wanted to build a future on lies, I'd give her exactly that. The next morning, I followed through with my plan. I showed up at the clinic, gave them a sample. Not mine, of course, and left with a small smile on my face. It was the first time in days that I felt like I had some control over the situation. Emma had no idea, and that's how it would stay for now. When I returned home later, she greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. A radiant smile spread across her face. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice bright and full of hope. The same voice she used to speak to David, no doubt. I smiled back, keeping my rage tightly bottled up. "Perfect," I lied. "Everything's set. We should hear back from the clinic soon." Her eyes lit up, and she wrapped her arms around me, pulling me into a hug. The scent of her perfume, once comforting, now made me nauseous. But I held her anyway, playing the role of the doting husband one last time. As the days went on, I played my part. We attended the fertility appointments together, discussing baby names and nursery colors as if nothing had changed between us. But beneath it all, I was counting down the days until the inevitable bomb would drop. I'd let her get pregnant. I'd let her carry that child, all while believing it was ours. And then, when the timing was right, I'd reveal the truth. It was a cruel, vengeful plan, but after what she had done, I no longer felt any sympathy for Emma. Every smile she gave me felt like a slap to the face, every kiss a mockery. But I kept it together, knowing that the real blow would come later, when she least expected it. But there was more to plan, more revenge to plot. David wouldn't escape unscathed either. I couldn't let him walk away from this without paying the price for what he had done. But that would come later. First, I needed to make sure Emma would never forget the consequences of her betrayal. In the days that followed, I watched Emma closely. She was happier than I had seen her in months, if not years, and the weight of her joy was suffocating. She moved through the house with a lightness, as if this impending pregnancy was going to fix everything between us. She had no idea that I was waiting, just waiting for the moment to pull the rug from beneath her feet. Our doctor's appointments went smoothly, and Emma, so wrapped up in her blissful anticipation, failed to notice the coldness building in me. I played along, smiling through every discussion of baby names, enduring her excitement as she painted a picture of the family she thought we were building. But each time she talked about the future, all I could think about was how she had ripped ours apart, and how I would return the favor. I began to distance myself from her in small ways. I would leave early for work and return home late, making excuses about projects or late meetings. I'd pretend to be too tired to talk, too exhausted to engage. And when David came by to see Grace, I found ways to be out of the house entirely. The sight of him disgusted me. David had no idea I was onto him. He carried on like everything was normal, sitting at the dinner table with Grace and Emma, as if nothing was wrong. But now, when I looked at him, all I saw was a predator, a snake slithering into my life, into my family. I thought about confronting him, grabbing him by the collar, and throwing him out of my house, but that would come later. I wasn't ready for the explosion yet. One evening, as I sat alone in my office at home, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emma. I stared at the screen, already dreading the message. "Emma, I'm so excited, babe. The doctor says I should know if I'm pregnant by the end of the month. I can't believe it's finally happening for us. I love you so much. We're going to have the life we always wanted." Her words felt like a punch to the gut. I tossed the phone onto my desk, staring at it with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The life we always wanted? How could she say that with such confidence when she had already shattered that dream? I picked up the phone again, but instead of replying to Emma, I found myself scrolling through old pictures. Ones of Grace, Emma, and me during happier times. We had been a tight-knit family once. I had adored my wife, and our bond with Grace had always been strong. But that life was gone now, wasn't it? Emma had made sure of that. I scrolled past a photo of David, standing next to Grace at her last birthday party. My blood boiled as I looked at him. He had wormed his way into our lives, laughing with Grace, joking with me, all while betraying us behind our backs. I clenched my fist, feeling the familiar surge of anger rise within me. But no, I wasn't going to let my emotions get the better of me. This had to be controlled. Every move I made from now on had to be calculated, precise. My revenge on Emma was already in motion. But for David, I needed to be patient. I needed to wait for the perfect moment to bring everything crashing down on him. He had to believe he had one, that he had stolen something from me without consequences. A few days later, Emma came home beaming, her eyes filled with excitement. "Guess what?" she said, nearly bouncing on her feet. I didn't have the energy to respond. I was sitting on the couch, pretending to read a book, but all I wanted to do was get out of the house and away from her. She didn't wait for me to guess. "I'm pregnant," she blurted, her voice high-pitched and breathless. I forced a smile. "That's amazing," I said, swallowing down the bile that rose in my throat. Emma threw herself into my arms, hugging me tightly. I felt her heart beating against my chest, her breath warm against my neck as she whispered, "We did it. We're finally going to have a baby." I nodded, patting her back as I whispered, "Yeah, we did." But the weight of the lie hung between us like a shadow. I knew the truth would come soon enough, and when it did, her happiness would shatter into 1,000 pieces. The next few weeks were torture. Emma glowed with that pregnancy excitement, planning everything from nursery decor to baby names. She even wanted to throw a small celebration for close family and friends, and though I hated the idea, I agreed. I had to keep playing my part. For now, David still came around, and Grace was oblivious to what was happening behind her back. It killed me to see her smile so sweetly at the man who was betraying her. But I said nothing. I pretended not to notice, waiting for the right time to set everything in motion. One evening, while Emma was out with her friends, I was sitting in my study when Grace knocked on the door. "Dad, can we talk?" I put down my book, sensing the seriousness in her voice. "Sure, honey. What's up?" She came in and sat down across from me, her face clouded with worry. "Something's been bothering me," she started, biting her lip. "It's about Mom and David." The word sent a jolt of shock through me, though I kept my expression neutral. "What about them?" I asked, treading carefully. Grace hesitated, her fingers fidgeting in her lap. "I don't know. It's probably nothing. I mean, I trust them, but sometimes it feels like they're too close." Her words hung in the air, thick with tension. I could feel the rage bubbling inside me, but I stayed calm. "Too close how?" I pressed, trying to keep my voice steady. Grace shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know. It's probably just me being paranoid, but I've seen them talking privately a lot. And the other day, when I came home early, I found them sitting on the couch together, and they just seemed weird, like, too comfortable." I wanted to scream, to tell her everything, but I couldn't. "Not yet. I'm sure it's nothing, honey," I lied, trying to sound reassuring. "Maybe they're just getting along, because David's been around a lot." Grace nodded slowly, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. "Maybe," she said softly before standing up. I hope I'm wrong." I nodded, watching her leave the room, my heart heavy. I hated keeping this from her, but I needed to wait. I needed everything to be perfect. As Emma's pregnancy progressed, I began to feel the pressure mounting. Every smile, every moment of her joy, was a knife twisting in my gut. She believed that this baby was ours, that this child would somehow heal the wounds she didn't know I carried. But the truth would come out soon enough. One evening, as we lay in bed, she rested her head on my chest, whispering softly about how excited she was for the baby. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of her betrayal suffocating me. She had no idea what was coming, no idea that this dream of hers was built on a lie. And David, his day of reckoning was approaching too. I had been planning everything carefully, waiting for the right time to confront him. When I did, it wouldn't just be a confrontation. It would be his undoing. But for now, I waited. I let them believe they had one. The storm was coming, and they had no idea. I had waited long enough. The tension in the house was unbearable, like a rubber band stretched too tight, ready to snap at the slightest touch. Emma was now 4 months pregnant, her belly starting to show, her face glowing with the joy of impending motherhood. The sight of her made my stomach churn. She moved around the house, humming softly, talking about baby clothes and cribs, utterly oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. But I wasn't waiting for her anymore. I had watched them long enough. Emma and David, acting like nothing was happening, lying to Grace, lying to me, lying to themselves. Every time David came over to see Grace, I noticed how his eyes would flicker toward Emma, how they would exchange glances when they thought no one was watching. Grace, poor Grace, was still blind to it all. My heart ached for her, but I knew I had to protect her from this in the right way. I couldn't let her find out by accident. The truth had to come out on my terms, on my timeline. And so, I made my first move. It wasn't the big explosion yet, but a carefully calculated strike. I'd already set my plan for Emma in motion. Soon she would realize that the child she carried wasn't mine, and that would break her. But for now, it was David's turn to face the consequences of what he had done. The opportunity came on a Saturday morning. Grace had gone out for brunch with some friends, and David, as usual, showed up at the house under the pretense of waiting for her to return. Emma had left for a prenatal yoga class, one of those ridiculous new rituals she'd adopted since the pregnancy. I had the house to myself, and David, unwittingly, had walked right into the lion's den. He greeted me with his usual fake friendliness. "Hey, Mr. Turner," he said, giving me that same charming grin he'd always used to disarm me. I forced a smile, but my eyes were cold. "David," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the anger boiling inside me. "Grace isn't home yet, but you can wait here. I'll grab us some coffee." He looked a little surprised by my offer, but didn't object. He settled on the couch, casually scrolling through his phone, completely unaware of what was coming. I poured 2 cups of coffee, set them on the table, and sat across from him. My heart pounded in my chest, but outwardly, I was calm. I had rehearsed this moment in my head 100 times. "So, David," I started casually, taking a sip of my coffee, "you and Grace are pretty serious, huh?" David smiled, his eyes lighting up at the mention of her. "Yeah, I really care about her. She's great." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "She is. She's one of the best people I know. Honest, loyal. She deserves someone who feels the same way about her." David shifted in his seat, sensing the change in my tone. "Of course," he said, though his smile faltered slightly. I leaned forward, fixing him with a cold stare. "You know, David," I said, my voice low and controlled, "I've always liked you. You seem like a good kid, someone I could trust." David's smile faded completely now, replaced by an uneasy look. He shifted again, suddenly uncomfortable under my gaze. "Mr. Turner, is something wrong?" "Oh, something is definitely wrong," I said, my voice tightening. "You see, David, I know." His eyes widened slightly, confusion and fear flashing across his face. "Know what? I know about you and Emma," I said, the words slicing through the air like a knife. "I know what's been going on between you two behind my back, and behind Grace's back." David froze, the color draining from his face. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked like a deer caught in headlights, completely unprepared for this confrontation. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, his voice shaky. I laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Oh, come on, David. Don't insult me by lying. I've seen it. I've seen the way you look at her, the way you sneak around this house, thinking no one is watching. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" David looked like he was about to panic. His eyes darted toward the door, as if he was contemplating making a run for it. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice desperate. "I swear, nothing has happened between us. I would never." "Shut up," I snapped, my voice sharp and angry. "I'm not here to listen to your pathetic excuses. I know what's been going on, and I want you to know something, David." I leaned in closer, my eyes locked on his. "I'm not going to let you get away with it." He swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he clutched the edge of the couch. "Please, Mr. Turner, I'm sorry." The words felt hollow, meaningless. His apology wasn't for what he had done, it was because he had been caught. The coward couldn't even look me in the eye. "I'm going to give you one chance, David," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "One chance to leave Grace alone, to stay away from my wife, and to walk out of this house right now and never come back." David's eyes widened in disbelief. "What, you want me to leave Grace? But I love her." My hands curled into fists at his words. "Love?" He didn't know the first thing about love. If he did, he wouldn't have betrayed her like this. He wouldn't have snuck around with her mother like a thief in the night. "If you love her, you'll leave her," I said, my voice icy. "Because if you don't, I will destroy you." David stared at me, his mouth hanging open. He knew I was serious. He could see the cold fury in my eyes. "I wasn't bluffing. If you try to see her again, I will tell Grace everything. I will make sure she knows exactly what kind of man you are. And trust me, David, once she knows, she'll never want to see your face again. So, if you care about her at all, you'll walk away now." David looked down, his face pale, his hands trembling. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Finally, he nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I'll go," he muttered, barely able to meet my eyes. "I'll stay away from Grace. I'm sorry." I stood up, towering over him as he sat there, looking like a broken, defeated child. "Good," I said coldly. "Now, get out of my house." David didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing his phone and rushing to the door without looking back. I watched him leave, my heart pounding in my chest, my fists still clenched. The satisfaction I expected didn't come. Instead, I felt hollow, empty. But this wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Later that evening, Emma came home from her yoga class, practically glowing. She walked into the living room, where I sat, sipping a drink and staring at the fireplace. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice cheerful. I didn't look at her. "Fine," I said, my voice flat. She didn't seem to notice my tone. "I ran into Karen at yoga today. She's also pregnant. Can you believe that? We were talking about David came by," I said, cutting her off. There was a pause. I could feel her stiffen slightly. "Oh," she said, trying to sound casual. "To see Grace, I assume?" "No," I said, finally turning to look at her. "He came to see me." Her smile faltered, confusion flickering across her face. "You? What did you two talk about?" I held her gaze, letting the silence hang heavy in the room. "Everything." Her eyes widened slightly, panic flashing across her face for just a moment before she composed herself. Everything, she echoed, her voice shaky. I nodded, watching her carefully. I know, Emma. I know what's been going on. She stood there, frozen, her face pale. For the first time in months, I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. And for a brief moment, it felt good. It felt right. But this was just the beginning. The house had never felt so quiet. After David had fled, after Emma stood frozen in fear of my words, a silence hung in the air, a silence that screamed louder than any confrontation ever could. Emma, for the first time in weeks, was at a loss for words. She had tried to hide her affair, to bury the guilt beneath false smiles and hopeful conversations about the baby. But now, the cracks in her facade were starting to show, and I was ready to tear it all apart. I watched her closely over the next few days, waiting for her to make a move. She tiptoed around me, anxious, her behavior more erratic than usual. Gone was the confident woman who had floated through the house, glowing with the thrill of her pregnancy. In her place was a woman gripped by fear, unsure of how much I knew or what I was planning to do. Emma didn't mention David again, and for a while, neither did I. I wanted her to sit with the uncertainty, to feel the weight of her guilt pressing down on her like a vice. It wouldn't be long before she cracked, and when she did, I would be ready. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. One evening, Emma sat across from me at the dinner table, nervously picking at her food. She had barely eaten anything in days. Every time she looked at me, I could see the unasked questions in her eyes. How much did I know? How long had I known? Was she about to lose everything? Gary. Her voice was shaky as she spoke my name. We need to talk. I set my fork down, leaning back in my chair, meeting her gaze. About what? She hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she fidgeted with her napkin. About what you said the other night. About David. My heart beat faster, but I kept my expression cold, detached. What about it? Emma took a deep breath, her eyes welling with tears. I don't know what you think you know, but it's not what it seems. I almost laughed at the pathetic attempt to save herself. Even now, when she was cornered, she was trying to spin it, trying to minimize what had happened. Not what it seems. I repeated, my voice a low growl. Then explain it to me, Emma. Explain what was going on between you and our daughter's boyfriend in our bedroom. The color drained from her face as I said it aloud. I could see the panic rising in her, the fear that everything was slipping out of her control. Gary, please, it was a mistake, she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. It didn't mean anything. I slammed my hand down on the table, making her jump. It didn't mean anything? You've been sneaking around with David behind my back, behind Grace's back, and you want me to believe it didn't mean anything? Emma sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I don't know what happened. It just happened. I'm so sorry, Gary. I never meant for it to go this far. I stood up from the table, the rage I had been holding back for weeks now bubbling to the surface. You never meant for it to go this far? I spat, my voice shaking with anger. You've been betraying me, betraying Grace, and now you want to play the victim? Emma looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. Please, Gary. I love you. I love our family. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I stared at her, feeling nothing but contempt. Love? Don't talk to me about love. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have betrayed your own daughter. She sobbed harder, but I felt no sympathy. I had given her everything, my trust, my loyalty, and she had thrown it all away. But now it was my turn to throw everything away. You're pregnant, Emma, I said, my voice low and steady. You're pregnant with what you think is our child. But I'm going to tell you something that's going to change everything. Emma's sobbing quieted, her eyes wide with confusion. Well, what do you mean? I took a step closer to her, leaning down so that we were face to face. The child you're carrying isn't mine. She blinked, not understanding at first. What? What are you talking about? The fertility treatment, I said, my voice cold and deliberate. The sperm I gave to the doctor for the IVF, it wasn't mine. I switched it with someone else's. For a moment, Emma didn't react. She just stared at me, the words not sinking in. Then, slowly, I saw the realization dawn in her eyes. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like she had been punched in the gut, her face pale, her hands shaking violently. What? She whispered, her voice barely audible. No, that's not possible. Gary, what are you saying? I stepped back, my face a mask of calm while inside I was seething. You wanted a child so badly. Well, now you have one. But it's not mine. You're carrying another man's baby. Emma collapsed back in her chair, her whole body trembling. No, that can't be true. How could you? How could you do that? How could I? I shouted, finally letting the full weight of my anger out. How could you do what you did? How could you betray me with a boy barely older than our daughter? How could you stand there and lie to my face every day while sneaking around behind my back? She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm so sorry. But her apologies meant nothing. I wasn't finished.